Hey team, we're here for chapter 11 of Bloom. Chapter 11. Anaya dreamed she was sniffing a flower and not sneezing at all. But she didn't like the scent or the way the petals tickled her nose. When she woke up, it was pitch dark and the unpleasant smell was still there and terribly familiar. She tried to sit up, but it was like someone had tucked in the covers too tightly. Her arms were pinned to her sides. Something thin poked shyly up her nose, and she yelped. She jerked her head away, tried to yank her arms free. The thin, pokey thing plunged deeper, and Anaya gagged. She thrashed, kicking against the covers. Across her body, she felt things snap, and suddenly she could pull her arms free. She grabbed at whatever was inside her nose and ripped it out. Mom! That terrible perfume. It was the same as inside the pit plants. Anaya grabbed the flashlight on her night table and raced down the hall into Mum's room. It reeked of sleeping gas. Anaya gasped. Mum's entire body was crisscrossed with black vines. They grew across her face, covering her mouth. Two twitching tendrils had grown right into both nostrils. Anaya seized the tendrils and tugged. They slid out a bit, then snapped. Mum made an awful wet choking sound. There must be stuff caught farther back. Anaya peeled the vines off Mum's mouth, parted her lips, and shone the flashlight inside. At the back of her throat was a dense tangle of vines, big as an egg. She slid her hand inside her Mum's mouth. Her fingertips dug into the knot, getting a good grip. She pulled. With a wet smack, a long, glistening tangle of vines came out. Mum coughed several times and gave a big sigh, but didn't wake up. Mum! Anaya shook her. The perfume had knocked her out cold. Anaya rushed to the window, tripping over a thick vine that had grown across the floor. Mum needed fresh air. Who knew what this stuff did if you breathed it for too long? She pulled back the curtains and nearly screamed because the window was webbed with vines, blocking the pre-dawn sky. She tried to open the window, but the vines had welded it shut. There was a smaller window with only a couple of tendrils across it, and Anaya forced that one all the way open. Cool air streamed into the room. In the bathroom, Anaya got a mug of cold water, ran back and splashed it onto Mum's face. Gently, Anaya slapped her cheek, then harder. Mum! Finally, she twitched, and her eyes opened slowly. She stared at Anaya blearily, then sat bolt upright, spluttering. What the heck? She croaked, spitting out bits of vine. The vine was growing down your nose. It was strangling you. Mum looked wildly around the room. Snapped tendrils littered the bed sheets. A thick, corded vine ran down the bedpost to the floor and disappeared into a crack in the baseboard. That grew just overnight? Mum gasped. We should have pulled it all down yesterday. Or maybe, Anaya thought, it was from an entirely different pit plant outside their house. Seething, she jumped off the bed and grabbed the vine near the wall. She leaned back, grunting and swearing and yanking with all her might. Mum's hands seized hold just behind her own, and they pulled together. Finally, it snapped. Anaya fell back on the floor, panting. We've got to warn Dad. I know. Mum grabbed her phone, dialed, and swore. Still out of service. I'm calling Diane Sumner at the RCMP. Go pack a bag. Where are we going? I'm getting us a plane, and we're going to find your dad. Good. In her bedroom, she snatched some clothes off her messy floor, sniffed to make sure they were cleanish, and threw them into her backpack. There was a sharp knock at the front door. She raced downstairs just as Mum was opening it. It was an unfamiliar woman dressed in a navy blue suit. The crest on her lapel made her look like a government official. Behind her, an RCMP cruiser idled on the road. Lila Dara? The woman asked, looking straight at Mum. Anaya had never seen her Mum's face go so pale. Is Michael all right? Mum blurted, her voice cracking. Anaya's stomach flipped over. Michael? The government woman said with a frown, then looked suddenly apologetic. Oh my goodness, your husband. He's absolutely fine. As far as I know, that's not the reason I came. Thank God, Mum said, sagging against the doorframe. I'm so sorry. I did that very badly, the woman said. She was about Mum's age, with a big freckle on her left cheek, curly shoulder-length hair, and quick, intelligent green eyes. My name's Dr. Stephanie Weber. I'm a scientist with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and this must be Anaya, yes? Anaya nodded weakly, so relieved that Dad was okay. What's this about? Mom asked. Dr. Weber said, I've come because of your daughter. When Petra entered the doctor's lounge of the island hospital, Anaya and her mother were already sitting around a coffee-stained table with Seth Robertson. Anaya's mom had her hand on Seth's shoulder and was softly saying how sorry she was about Mrs. Antos, and Seth just nodded mutely. Petra already knew what had happened. After she and her mom had escaped a giant pit plant, the RCMP had been swamped with emergency calls from all over the island. 7 people had died, 3 who'd fallen into pit plants, 4 who'd been strangled by vines while they slept, like Mrs. Antos. And then came the call that a scientist had arrived on the island and was looking for her and Anaya and Seth. Someone from the CSIS. This must be her, the one with the blue suit, standing to greet her. Her smile made her look a bit like Jezebel on that reality cooking show. But when she stopped smiling, she looked more like Chelsea on the space station show, except for that fetching little mole on her cheek. You must be Petra. Thank you for bringing her, Sergeant Sumner, she said. I'm Dr. Stephanie Weber, and this is Carlene Lee. She pointed to a woman with hair that had been bleached too many times. Carlene's a social worker with child welfare. Petra supposed she must be there for Seth. Petra met his eye and gave him a sympathetic smile. She couldn't imagine what it would be like to find someone strangled in their bed. Please sit down, Dr. Weber said. I didn't want to start until you were all here. Petra took a seat next to Seth. The way he talked at the hospital yesterday had freaked her out a bit. All the stuff about his feathers, and the 3 of them being the same. Still, she was startled by how glad she was to be back in the same room as him and Anaya. Dr. Weber got right to it. We saw the video from the field incident. You 3 were completely unaffected by that plant. The corrosive enzyme, the sleeping gas. There's no other case where people just walked away. I also noted from your hospital records that none of you are allergic to the blackgrass pollen. You've read their hospital records? Mom asked sharply. Petra rolled her eyes. Mom was very big on privacy rights. She didn't seem to realize that no one had privacy anymore. No one even wanted it. You could probably find everyone's hospital records on social media. Yes, said Dr. Weber, I requisitioned them as a matter of national security. As of now, we're in a state of emergency. Petra's mother looked grim, but not surprised. Had she already known? That would explain the shopping cart overflowing with chickpeas. And not just here, Dr. Weber continued, worldwide, we've got millions of people with severe allergic reactions to these plants. Acute asthma, bronchitis, pneumonia, sometimes fatal. We don't know the long-term effects of exposure. A lot of our population is literally suffocating. That's just from the black grass, and now we have an even more aggressive species. We know, believe me, Mom said a bit impatiently, and I've got an island to take care of with only 4 officers. So what does this have to do with our kids? Dr. Weber looked at Petra, then Seth, and Anaya. There's clearly something very unique about you 3. Petra shifted uncomfortably. She was sounding a lot like Seth, talking about how they were all the same. Your bodies have incredible natural defenses against these plants, Dr. Weber continued. If we can figure out what that is, we might be able to make a vaccine, so others won't be harmed either. Petra saw her mother exchange looks with Anaya's. So you want to run tests on them? Petra's mother asked. Yes, Dr. Weber replied. Shouldn't you guys be worrying more about killing this stuff? Believe me, Sergeant Sumner, the military is taking care of that. But we also need to protect ourselves in the meantime, especially since we're dealing with organisms that aren't from this planet. A deep silence expanded through the room. For real? Petra exclaimed. I thought it was bioterrorism, Anaya said. Dr. Weber shook her head. We're not ready to tell the public yet. You're saying these plants are aliens? Anaya said. Petra swallowed. Once you heard that word, you couldn't just unhear it. It ricocheted all over the place. She looked around, the chairs, the table, the grimy floor. These things were as solid and as normal as ever, but they now existed in a world that included alien life. The term we use is cryptogenic, Dr. Weber said, meaning of unknown origin. You know for sure? Anaya's mother asked, leaning forward in her chair. We ran DNA tests, Dr. Weber said, and there's nothing like these plants on Earth, not even close. How? Said Seth. How'd they even get here? We don't know for certain. Somehow the seeds entered the Earth's atmosphere. Like on a meteorite? He asked. Possibly. Petra frowned. Wouldn't they just all burn up entering the atmosphere? Maybe not, Anaya said. Dad told me about the Murchison meteorite in Australia. It had organic compounds on it. Amino acids. She looked at Dr. Weber. Right? Yes, the building blocks of life. A big enough meteorite shower could have scattered seeds worldwide. Petra didn't remember hearing anything about a meteor shower. Wouldn't that have made the news? No, she said. Those seeds were in the rain. That's another theory, said Dr. Weber, and the favorite right now. I'm more focused on protecting people from the plants than figure out where they came from, which is why I'm interested in you three and finding out if we can make other people immune. What kind of tests would you do? Anaya's mother asked. Blood tests, primarily, allergy tests, some low-dose medical imaging. Since they're minors, we need your consent. Dr. Weber was already taking forms from her attaché case and passing them around. Seth, Carlene said, in the most soothing voice Petra had ever heard, you have no guardian at the moment. What about Mr. Antos? He asked, sounding surprised. He's too ill right now. He's agreed to surrender his guardianship. Oh. So technically you're a ward of the crown. Do you understand what that means? Yep. Seth's voice was numb, but his eyes were wet. Petra felt her heart clench. She'd seen his eyes in the supermarket that time and knew how much he cared about Mr. Antos. So I'll be acting as your temporary guardian, Seth, said Carlene. I don't work for CSIS. I'm here to represent you. Nothing happens if you're not comfortable, okay? Seth just nodded. His face hardened. So I need to know if you're okay with these tests, and if I'm good. Thank you, Seth, Dr. Weber said gently. Petra watched her mother carefully read the paperwork. She always read things before signing. She even read the stuff on the internet before she clicked. You all right with this? Mom asked her. She nodded. Yeah, I don't mind. You're a medical doctor, I assume, Anaya's mother asked Dr. Weber. Yes, a biochemist. I have a team in Vancouver. Vancouver? Petra said in surprise. The hospital here doesn't have the diagnostics we need. How are you planning on getting them over there? Her mother wanted to know. The same helicopter I came in. It's waiting on the pad. You mean right now? Petra asked. She hadn't expected it to be so soon. That's why we asked you to pack a few things, Dr. Weber said. No, Anaya said, looking anxiously at her own mother. I mean, I want to help, but we need to find Dad first. Ah, said Dr. Weber with an understanding nod. We're very aware of your father's work. He's out collecting soil samples at the eco-reserves, right? We haven't heard from him since he left, Anaya said, yesterday morning. We might be able to reach him from the base, said Dr. Weber. They have more powerful equipment. Can't you send a boat out for him? Anaya asked. What if he's hurt? Anaya, there are people all over the country who need urgent help right now, said Dr. Weber. Petra could tell by Anaya's eyes that she wasn't ready to give up yet. But he's collecting soil samples that might kill the black grass and other plants. She was starting to cry now, and her mother put an arm around her. I'm sure he's absolutely fine. I know how important your father's work is, Anaya, Dr. Weber said. Most likely, you'll only be at the base 2 nights, 3 at most. Anaya still looked miserable, but she nodded. I'd like to come as well, Anaya's mother told Dr. Weber. I completely understand, but the helicopter only carries 5 passengers. Petra quickly did the math. Her, Seth, Anaya, the doctor, and the social worker. No mothers. She glanced at Mom and was startled by the pang of alarm she felt. Dr. Weber looked sympathetically at both mothers. I can arrange for another helicopter to come and collect you and your partners as soon as possible. With luck, even later today. And I'll be with them the whole time, Carleen chimed in, until a parent is present. Petra caught Mum giving Carleen and Dr. Weber the sternest RCMP look. Your facility, where is it exactly? The military base off Stanley Park, Deadman's Island. Petra almost laughed out loud. The name didn't exactly inspire confidence, but she remembered the park from her visits to Vancouver. And it's completely secure? Mum asked. Absolutely, said Dr. Weber. What do you think, Diane? Asked Anaya's mother. They'll be safer over there for sure. I agree, said Anaya's mother. Petra watched their mothers sign the forms. We're very grateful, said Dr. Weber, gathering the paperwork and slipping it into her case. Oh, one last thing. She produced 2 specimen jars and slid them toward the mums. If you wouldn't mind just spitting into the jar, we'll be able to check your DNA as well to see if there are any hereditary factors. Thank you. All of this will be a huge help in countering the invasion. The word caught Petra totally off guard. Invasion? That's exactly what this is, Dr. Weber told her. You make it sound like it was planned, Seth said. Planned or not, said Dr. Weber, our planet's being colonized. Petra heard a helicopter's rotors start to turn, somewhere outside. Dr. Weber's phone pinged. She glanced at it and then stood. We need to go. The helicopter made a sudden sideways dip, and Seth felt Petra tense beside him. She looked a bit green. He hoped she wasn't going to throw up. Next to her sat Anaya, who didn't seem bothered by the turbulence. She knew her mom was a pilot. He knew her mom was a pilot, so she was probably used to this. Opposite them were Dr. Weber and Carleen Lee. Over the years, Seth had met lots of social workers and was good at sizing them up fast. Carleen was one of those super efficient ones. Her smile was frequent, but a bit chilly. She'd had her job long enough to keep herself at a good distance. They bumped again, but Seth didn't mind. He'd never been in a helicopter, never been on an airplane either, and he loved it. The way that it had just lifted straight off the pad like an elevator, then nosed forward, it reminded him of his dreams, the way he sometimes soared through the sky. Invasion. When Dr. Weber had said that word, it was like the temperature in the room plunged. He'd seen the shock on everyone's face. It sounded like a war. He wondered why it didn't feel more frightening. Nothing seemed real since he'd found Mrs. Antos cocooned by vines. Definitely, he would have been more scared without Anaya and Petra here. He felt calmer just being with them, and Dr. Weber. At the meeting, he'd liked the way she talked directly to him and the girls instead of to the mothers. He liked all her facts. He'd only known her a couple hours, but he already trusted her. Seth gazed out the window. Below, the Vancouver airport looked normal enough until he noticed the sinkholes in the runways. A jet jutted out of a huge crater. Its left wing snapped against the tarmac. Over neighborhoods, Seth saw streets turned into canyons by the tall black grass. Roadblocks were everywhere, pit plants, holes in the parks and golf courses, charred sinkholes in asphalt and sidewalks. Hardly anyone outside. Even from up here, he could see pollen glittering in the air. As they passed over downtown, the streets were nearly deserted. Some of the tall buildings looked like they had cracks in them, until Seth realized they were vines crawling their way up the glass and steel. Stanley Park bristled with black grass. Its open fields were cordoned off with yellow tape. A lone bicyclist in neon green racing gear pedaled madly around the seawall, head to handlebars. The helicopter made a smooth turn, and Seth got his first glimpse of Deadman's Island. Jutting into the harbor, the military base was connected to the park by a skinny road that was gated and guarded by 2 armed soldiers. As the helicopter descended, Seth saw teams of masked personnel cutting down the black grass along the base's fence perimeter. In a cratered field, a bulldozer was dragging something dark purple and boulder-sized out of the ground. In the center of the base were some wooden barracks, several old brick buildings, and a bigger, more modern one. The helicopter settled on the pad, and the co-pilot got out and opened the doors. Mr. Weber guided them to the modern building. Even on the short walk across the tarmac, the doctor and Carleen Lee started sneezing. Inside, it smelled like a hospital. The entire building's climate controlled, so it's pollen free, Dr. Weber said as they made their way down a corridor with lots of windowless doors. I'll show you where you're staying, Carleen said. It's a small apartment. It's really nice. Do we have our own bedrooms? Petra asked hopefully. Seth does, and me. You and Anaya are sharing. Seth caught the dismay in Petra's expression. What? Anaya asked. You're so messy. Do you still snore? Anaya shrugged. I guess we'll find out. They turned a corner, and up ahead, Seth glimpsed a tall man with buzzed gray hair. His uniform had lots of colored bars on it. Ah, said Dr. Weber quietly. You're about to meet Colonel Pearson. The colonel stood peering through a long observation window at a shooting range. Inside, soldiers milled about, buckling on body armor, handling various lethal-looking weapons. As the colonel turned to greet them, the deep lines in his gaunt face seemed to tug down the sides of his mouth. So, these must be the Miracle 3. Dr. Weber introduced them all by name and then said, the colonel was kind enough to offer my team a home here on this base. I wanted more weapons, but they sent me a scientist instead, the colonel said dryly. And if my work's successful, Colonel, you'll have soldiers who are immune to the plants they're fighting. The colonel just grunted and spoke into the intercom on the wall. Go ahead. At the back of the shooting range, a thick plastic curtain parted, and Seth saw a row of 3 pit plants tipped against the wall, like giant rotting potatoes. He'd never seen them from the outside before, only the inside. Their flesh was wrinkly, and from the bottom of each sprouted a thick black vine that had been hacked very short. Where'd you get them? Petra asked. There's no shortage. We're still bulldozing them from our fields, the colonel said. Don't worry, Dr. Weber. We've saved enough for your science experiments. I appreciate that, she replied. As Seth watched, a soldier opened fire with a machine gun. The pit plant swallowed every bullet. When the shooting ceased, another soldier went over and poked the top of the plant with a stick. The fleshy lips sprang open, still very much alive and ready to eat. I'm not sure you can kill them with bullets, said Anaya. Maybe not, agreed the colonel, but we'll find a way. The soldiers crouched behind a low wall of sandbags. One of them pulled the pin from a hand grenade. Those things are full of acid, Petra warned the colonel. With excellent aim, the soldier lobbed the grenade right inside the open pit plant, then ducked behind the sandbags. The pit plant snapped shut its lips, then exploded. Bits of plant splattered everywhere, including the glass observation window, right in front of Seth's face. I call that dead, Pearson said, looking at the pulpy mess where the pit plant once rested. Right away, Seth saw the acid fuming on the walls and the floor. Even the glass was smoking. One of the soldiers stood and hurriedly pulled off his helmet. The top was smoldering. He held it up to the window for the colonel to see. The acid had burned a small hole clean through. Pearson said calmly into the intercom, Everyone out of there until we get the hazmat crew to clean up. We're going to try the flamethrowers. Be careful, said Seth. The smoke might be toxic, just like the black grass. We'll take precautions, the colonel said, walking away. He doesn't seem very happy we're here, Seth said quietly when the colonel was out of earshot. Don't worry about the colonel, said Dr. Weber. He's a good man, and he wants to kill these things as quickly as possible. We're both trying to save lives, but I'm not sure he sees the value in what I'm doing. So, are you 3 ready to begin? End of chapter 11.